The richest country in the world is collapsing. As we speak, there are $30 trillion in debt. Politics are more divided than ever, and people are growing tired of endless wars abroad. The United States has dominated the global economy for decades, but its position at the top is no longer secure. And even worse news is that its demise will drag the rest of the world down with it. A few weeks ago, the world's most powerful banker, JP Morgan, issued a dire warning about the state of the US economy. He said there's a really good chance that something breaks in the next 6 to 12 months. What he means by something breaking is either a recession or total economic collapse. Today, we'll explore what the collapse of the US economy would look like. We'll examine the warnings from some of the brightest minds in finance and see how this will affect your life. What you're about to learn might shock you, so make sure to stick around until the end. And if you appreciate the insights, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date with our latest videos. Let's start with the basics. The United States economy is the largest in the world, with a GDP of $26 trillion. That means the country produces more goods and services than any other nation on Earth. However, this doesn't tell the whole story, because the United States is also the most indebted nation in the world, with a national debt of over $30 trillion. This means that the government has borrowed a staggering amount of money from both domestic and foreign lenders. To put this debt into perspective, it's equivalent to almost 130% of the country's GDP. The biggest problem here is that the interest payments on this debt are now consuming a larger share of the government's budget. For example, in 2023, interest payments consumed 10% of all federal spending. That was the highest level since 1997. In just the last 4 years, interest payments have tripled. If rates continue to rise, so will interest payments. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office projects that interest payments will consume 18% of all federal spending by 2028. Now, imagine you had a friend who borrowed $30,000. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. But then they borrowed another $30,000 and then another $30,000. Before they knew it, they owed $90,000 and were struggling to make their monthly payments. You might think this is a crazy scenario, but it's exactly what's happening to the United States. And it's not because Americans are spendthrifts. It's because the government has been borrowing money for decades to fund its operations. Now, the bill is coming due. Debt is dangerous because it can quickly spiral out of control. When the United States defaulted on its debt earlier this year, the entire world was thrown into chaos. Investors panicked and began selling off their holdings, which caused stock prices to plummet and interest rates to skyrocket. A default would have devastated the world economy. That's why it's so important for the government to pay its bills on time. If they can't do that, investors will lose faith in the country's economy and the entire system will collapse. Investors are losing faith in the US economy, which is evident in the declining value of the dollar. The currency has lost half of its value over the past 20 years. This is significant because the dollar is the world's reserve currency. Most international transactions are conducted in dollars, and many countries peg their currency to the dollar. When the dollar loses value, it means that the United States economy is in trouble. This brings us to the third factor that could bring down the US economy: inflation. Inflation is a general increase in the prices of goods and services in an economy. When prices rise, people can buy less, which slows down economic growth. High inflation can also lead to social unrest as people struggle to afford basic necessities. The United States has experienced high inflation in recent years. The Consumer Price Index rose by 5% in 2022, the largest increase since 1982. This is partly due to the weakening dollar and partly due to supply chain disruptions caused by the pandemic. When the dollar weakens, it means that the United States has to pay more for imports. This drives up the cost of goods and services, which leads to inflation. Supply chain disruptions have also contributed to inflation. When the pandemic hit, factories shut down and shipping routes were disrupted. This led to shortages of goods, which drove up prices. What makes things even worse is that the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates to try to combat inflation. This is dangerous because it can cause a recession. A recession is a significant decline in economic activity that lasts for several months or even years. During a recession, people lose their jobs, businesses go bankrupt, and the economy grinds to a halt. The United States has experienced many recessions throughout its history, but none have been as severe as the one that's coming. JP Morgan is warning that the United States is heading towards a financial disaster. He believes that the Federal Reserve is making a big mistake by raising interest rates. He says that this will cause a recession and potentially bring down the entire world economy. To be fair, JP Morgan isn't the only one sounding the alarm. Some of the best economists in the world are sounding the alarm, including former Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers. He recently gave a speech in which he warned that the United States is living beyond its means. He says that the country is taking on too much debt and that this will eventually lead to a crisis. Summers believes that the government needs to get its fiscal house in order. He says that the country can't keep borrowing money to fund its operations. Otherwise, it'll eventually run out of lenders. Summers is also worried about the state of the housing market. He believes that home prices have gotten too expensive and that this will lead to a bubble that eventually bursts. When that happens, it'll bring down the entire economy with it. These warnings may sound familiar because they've been repeated many times before. For example, in 2008, Summers warned that the United States was in a financial crisis. At the time, the housing market was on the verge of collapse and the economy was teetering on the edge of a recession. Summers warned that the country needed to take action to fix the economy. But his warnings went unheeded and the Great Recession followed. What's scary is that something similar could happen again. The housing market is once again on the verge of collapse and the economy is slowing down. If the government doesn't take action, Summers fears that the United States could plunge into another deep recession. But there's another economist who sees things differently. His name is Paul Krugman, and he's a Nobel laureate. Krugman believes that the United States economy is strong and that it can withstand any challenges that come its way. He argues that the country has a large and growing middle class, a highly educated workforce, and abundant natural resources. Krugman also points out that the United States has a history of innovation. The country has been a leader in technology and entrepreneurship for decades. This has allowed the United States to grow and prosper even during tough times. Krugman isn't saying that the United States economy is perfect. He acknowledges that there are problems that need to be fixed, but he believes that the country has the tools it needs to overcome these challenges. So, what does this all mean for you? Well, first and foremost, it means that you need to be prepared. The United States economy is at a critical juncture. There's a real possibility that the country could plunge into a deep recession or even collapse. If that happens, it'll send shockwaves around the world. Here are a few things you can do to prepare yourself for what's coming. Diversify your investments. Don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Invest in a variety of assets, including stocks, bonds, and real estate. Have an emergency fund. You should have enough cash on hand to cover your expenses for at least 3 to 6 months. This will give you a safety net if you lose your job or if the economy takes a downturn. Reduce your debt. Debt is dangerous, especially when the economy is uncertain. If you have a lot of debt, you're more likely to struggle if the economy takes a downturn. So start paying down your debt now, so you'll be in a better position if tough times come. Learn new skills. The economy is constantly changing, and new skills are always in demand. Invest in yourself by learning new skills that will make you more valuable in the job market. As the United States economy teeters on the brink of collapse, it's essential to remember that every cloud has a silver lining. While the future may seem uncertain, it's crucial to focus on the opportunities that lie ahead. Let's embrace the unknown and navigate through these challenging times together. And let's hope for the best while preparing for the worst. Thank you for watching.